Once in the big city, Dan made the switch from his normal appearance to his disguise. While standing in line, waiting to board the bus, he kept an eye open for signs of his contact. Suddenly, his heart almost stopped. At the head of the line, a few feet from him, was his roomer. A mess of confused thoughts took possession of his mind for a few minutes, and then he calmed down and decided just to meet events as they transpired. The driver arrived and began to take the tickets and move the passengers aboard. Dan noted the agent took a place just 3 rows behind the driver's seat. If he could get past him without being recognized, everything would be all right. While the agent's head was turned, Dan went toward the rear of the bus and found 2 seats that were empty. He waited for his contact. "Pardon me, sir, is this seat taken?" And at that voice, Dan looked up into the face of a man he knew instinctively as 67. Moving over next to the window, Dan made room for his contact. After they were seated and the bus began to move out onto the road, Dan opened his briefcase, pulled out a scratch pad, and began to write. "Have you seen any good movies lately?" came the expected question. "No," was the answer, "but let me show you something I saw in a magazine recently." Dan drew on his pad a large box affair that would throw off onlookers, then while drawing, wrote in fine words what he wanted to convey to the agent. When 67 realized what he was doing, he leaned forward to shield the paper. Between drawings, Dan conveyed to him that their man was on the bus and where he was sitting. With that, 67 stood up and fumbled for something in the baggage compartment, meanwhile stealing quick glances toward the front seats. 67 slipped back into his seat and let out a quick breath. Quietly, he whispered, "Boy, there's something big cooking at the development tonight. That woman next to him is the wife of their biggest agent in the country. We've had her covered. Her shadow is on here, too. There's another one of our men on here, too, and he must have someone that he's covering. It looks as though this bus is loaded for bear." 67 continued, "This bus goes through the development area. No one is allowed off except those with permits. The woman must have false permits for all of her agents. I want you to stay with me. I will prepare you a permit." As the bus moved again, Dan's excitement grew. Here was the area about which 35 had told him. Here they were getting ready to produce a destructive power different and more terrible than anything the world had ever known. If it was successful and worked as planned, it could give us the instant victory in the war, and in the future no doubt would change the history of the world. It's no wonder, thought Dan, that our enemies were trying to steal the secret and would go to any lengths and suffer any risk to get it. Whoever controls this will control the world. Dan would never forget the feeling of the small but powerful pistol which 67 pressed into his hands before they left the bus, nor the roll of money he slipped into his hand for expenses. He would always clearly remember checking into that big wooden hotel right behind his game and how he managed to get a room right next to theirs. He would always wonder where and how he had lost 67 and the others and found himself alone in a room next to the most dangerous spies in the world. He was to keep in his memory how he made a makeshift stethoscope and sat for hours listening to their conversation and making notes on what he could understand. Part of the time the conversation was in English, and part of the time it seemed like Russian, but what notes he did get were dynamite. Fortunately, as he made the notes, he folded them sheet by sheet and put them inside his coat pocket, for his eavesdropping came to a sudden and almost disastrous end. After several hours of intent listening and writing, his wits did not react too quickly, and when a knock came at the door, he foolishly answered it with the pad and the homemade monitoring device in his hands. Just a red cap looking for a tip, he thought, as he closed the door, but as soon as he placed his listening device and his ear back to the wall, he heard the red cap relating to the folk in the next room what he had seen. A shiver of fear swept over him, and he felt frozen, but suddenly realized that he had to act at once. Springing into action, he quickly locked the door and then pushed a small chest of drawers against it. Nervously, he shifted the small pistol to the side pocket and silently prayed that he wouldn't have to use it. Just as he did, a rap came to the door. "What is it?" he called, knowing full well that what it was. "Evening paper for you, sir," came a voice that was hard to disguise. "Thank you, but I don't want one." Dan replied. But I need to check the supplies in your room, came an impatient voice. My room is all right. You can check it tomorrow. Dan knew this could not go on long, so while they talked, he had been looking for some way out of the second-story room. The voice outside the door dropped all pretense of politeness or disguise and said, well, I'm coming in anyway. And with that, an attempt was made to turn the knob. When they found the door locked, they began to shove against it, and Dan knew they would soon have it opened. He had just pulled his gun when two unexpected but welcome things took place. Suddenly, from down the hall, a terrific noise of cursing and other tumult came accompanied with running feet. This stopped the attack on the door temporarily. At the same time, Dan became conscious that someone was pecking on the window, and looking around, he was delighted to see the face of 67. Throwing open the window, Dan took in the situation and lost no time in getting out. 67 had thrown up a ladder to make the rescue. When they reached the ground, 67 grabbed Dan by the hand and pulled him close to the building. Hug the building, he whispered, and make it to the front. I'll cover for you. Dan found a cab waiting with an open door. He had scarcely gotten in until 67 landed next to him and the cab rushed away. As the cab went around the corner, Dan looked down the backside of the hotel and saw his renter spy leaning out of the window of the room for which he had just escaped. Speeding down the street in the cab, Dan quickly related what had taken place and gave all of his notes to 67. I wish I could have destroyed my homemade monitor, he said. One thing more, said 67. I believe you have helped to crack open something that has had us puzzled, and I am sure that you will be hearing from higher up. By the way, did you know that you are already getting quite a reputation in the borough? I'm not interested in that, came the weary reply. I'll be satisfied if I can get back to the full-time work of God. This cabbie is one of our men, continued 67. He will see that you get home and will also arrange a meeting between you and 35. The cab stopped at the corner. With a clasp of Dan's hand, 67 was gone from Dan's life.